I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com continues with me, and we welcome Jillian K. Melchior of National Review Online. Jillian's just returned from China, and she's put a piece up about her adventures in China. She spent many months, many years in China, but this time she's surprised me. There's a photograph accompanying her story. It must have a short story of its own, of a suitcase opened of phony American $100 bills for sale. But that's not the focus here. Jillian, a good evening to you.
Good evening.
Counterfeit anything in China. Counterfeit $100 bills, counterfeit Gucci, counterfeit Adidas, brand names. Counterfeit alcohol. Counterfeit alcohol, 37,000 bottles, you report, confiscated or in some way taken under advisement by the authorities. Who is buying counterfeit alcohol?
You know, I think it's a lot of the bartenders that are buying it, because in China, everything right now is about a cheap and quick profit. And there's that opportunity for them to take counterfeit alcohol, offer it to their clients for a discounted price, and then reap in the profit. They don't really care if you come back. They don't really care if it has poor health effects. And so counterfeit alcohol abounds.
This really must affect consumerism in China, though, because doesn't it really, people say, well, this can kill me, so I'm not going to buy it? Or what's going on here? Because this seems to me to be something that could actually undermine consumerism in China.
I sure think that's true. I mean, I talked to a couple bartenders about how difficult it is to run a legitimate clean business because counterfeit alcohol is so common, and they don't know whether or not the stuff that they're getting from their suppliers is real. And it was interesting talking to them, kind of figuring out the ways that they cope with it. I know one bartender who withholds a certain amount of the payment that they're going to offer and says, if we find one counterfeit bottle in all the shipment, you're never going to get your money and we're never going to use you again. But I think you really see the black market challenging legitimate business and also challenging consumers' willingness to participate in the market.
Now, once upon a time in the United States, we romanticized counterfeit alcohol. I think we called it moonshine. The idea was you manufactured your own somewhere in, well, the romantic version is that the still would always be in the hills, something like that.
Or your bathtub.
Yes, a bathtub. I've never actually romanticized the bathtub gin, but I will go along with this being counterfeit alcohol, moonshine. Do they talk about it in those terms? Cowboys who have a still somewhere behind a factory, and during the day they manufacture just enough to get to sell at the end of the day. Is that part of the game?
I think the crucial difference in it is back then, during Prohibition, alcohol wasn't allowed. Here, alcohol is completely illegal in China, but it's people trying to make a profit, so you don't really know what they're putting into it. So I talked to a doctor out there who's practiced for a lot of years. He said some of it's a cheap substitute, so it's like using 2 buck chuck instead of fine wine and calling it fine wine. Other times it's a chemically different alcohol. So one of them is basically antifreeze that they're putting in. It can attack your heart, can attack your kidneys. There's another one that's methanol, and that can make you blind. But a lot of what they're using is just simple rubbing alcohol that's flavored. And I'll tell you, you wake up with a terrible hangover after it.
Is that from personal experience?
It is. I had one beer, and it only takes about 250 milliliters to be dangerous. It's a very small amount.
This is interesting because I'm glad this problem didn't arise while my wife and I were living there. Because for corporate entertaining, sometimes you do have to get very drunk. And fortunately, we left China well before this problem really became an epidemic. But, it's not just alcohol. I think the worst stories really are melamine in milk and the kidney problems of all these little children, some of whom died.
Sure. And I think that's a big problem that China's having to reckon with right now. And it's in some ways a threat to the authority, because if you can't guarantee as a consumer that what you're getting is what you think that you're getting and what you're buying, that's a huge oversight problem, and that's a source of frustration and stability issues within the people, because they want to have a legitimate market, and they want the government to be able to ensure that, and it's falling short.
And it's really interesting because in Hong Kong now they have limits on the amount of baby formula that Chinese can buy and bring back across the border into China. And people are actually getting busted for buying too much baby formula. And this really just shows a complete distrust of the normal commerce in the mainland. And I think that's really important when you start to look at what's going on here.
Who's running the rings, Jillian? Are these enterprising outlaws, or are these the officials?
I think they're mostly enterprising outlaws. I mean, it's really people looking to make a cheap buck. They don't care about what happens to the consumer. They're looking for money in it. But it's disturbing that the government hasn't been able to create a clean market and it threatens legitimate business. And I also think when you've got rule of law faltering in that large of a regard, that really corrodes respect for authority.
And Gordon, I puzzle here. I didn't know counterfeit alcohol. It never occurred to me. Now, I know that North Korea manufactures counterfeit dollars, counterfeit cigarettes, counterfeit drugs, counterfeit alcohol. Could this exist without the party's knowledge?
No, it couldn't, John, because although, I agree with Jillian that these are basically criminal rings, these criminal rings cannot operate without some official help. Because, you think about how organized this is. You got to make it, you got to distribute it, you got to collect money. There's so many ways officials interact with these rings. And that's why you have officials becoming very, very wealthy in China, because they're part of this.
Jillian, is there an Al Capone of counterfeit liquor in China?
Not that I'm aware of, but there are certainly neighborhoods that are known for it. So one of the interesting things to me, this neighborhood that in December, 37,000 bottles of counterfeit alcohol was seized. That's an incredible amount. I was there just a couple months later. They'd had another raid on it. Yet you could still find very, very, very cheap drinks that are counterfeit.
37,000, that's not a four-man operation, Gordon. That's a factory.
Right, and this is what they get busted. This doesn't include all that they've successfully sold.
So the puzzle here is, if it's going forward, it sounds like a sinister way to discourage excessive drinking, doesn't it, Gordon?
Because eventually you don't drink because you're so scared.
So is there any evidence that there's... I didn't even know that Chinese were heavy drinkers, are they?
Oh, yeah. They're definitely heavy drinkers.
I know they gamble, but I did...
How can you gamble and not drink, John?
I'm unaware of these activities. But in any way, Jillian, right now, is there any evidence that people have cut back their alcoholic consumption, or are they importing things from overseas that are bonded and sealed, something like that?
Well, I don't think you can keep an expat away from alcohol, especially when they're traveling abroad. So that's one interesting point. But the other thing that I've found is that these counterfeit factories have become so advanced that there are seals on alcohol that are supposed to tell you that they've been safely exported. And the factories are counterfeiting those too. And so bartenders have kind of come up with their own tricks to make sure that the alcohol that they're getting is real. Jack Daniel's is a good one because it's got a unique taste, and when you mix it with Coke, it leaves a white rim around the cup. Bombay and Tonic's another good one.
She sounds like she knows what she's talking about.
I know. This is an expert here, John.
A lot of research went into this one.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think it's indicative that bartenders have to have all these tricks of the trade just to run their business.
And do people buy the counterfeit anyway because it's cheap? I know it's counterfeit. Give me another one.
Sure, they do. They do. I think people are attracted to what they perceive as a good deal. But in China, you get what you pay for, and sometimes not even that.
Jillian K. Melchior, just back from China, the fake alcohol market. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. Jillian's piece is available on National Review Online, where she writes, I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.